of agricultural exports. Thank you, Mr Chair.
I call Greg O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. As someone who stands in this House representing what on the surface of it would appear to be a very rural electorate, being a Haru, certainly while it's the most beautiful electorate in New Zealand, it also is quite interesting because it's one that really, when we look at dairying, it really is a picture and a history of dairying in New Zealand because, unbeknown to many, there were once 20 dairy farms in that electorate out in the Haru Valley. And those farms that once provided this fine city and the burgers thereof and the people thereof with their dairy products over the years, obviously has evolved somewhat now to it, essentially it's now horses and sheep mostly out there. However, that does give a little background to what I would like to discuss in relation to this bill and my own background in dairying. Let me just say that I was so young when I first started milking cows on a West Coast dairy farm that my father, instead of using metal cups, actually had plastic cups so that we young lads could actually reach up and put them on in the very modern cow shed, in the first herringbone cow shed on the West Coast. So here we were, and I suppose as a member of the Labor Party I'll be very careful that I'm not going to be re-quoted later on across the table that advocating for child labour. But here I was as a 6-year-old milking cows with my brothers while my father went off farm to help the rest of the West Coast. But although saying that too, although we did have that herringbone shed, that we did get many visitors from around the South Island coming because it was such an advanced piece of technology on this farm. It was to be obviously overtaken later on by those who were lucky enough to have the roundabout. However, it's a little bit sadder note before I go on to just the depth of the bill is that very farm and understanding that it is important that farming, and although farmers like to think themselves as a very independent bunch, right through the history of farming, there has been the need for good government oversight and even control to ensure that that industry does continue. And I talk of the TB. I can actually still remember actually my father looking at the results of the latest TB test, and the Northern Buller in particular was an area that was badly hit by TB and losing a third of the herd each time. And he, and like many other farmers in the district, were very nearly wiped out. It was only the timely intervention of government where those cattle that previously went down the chute because they were riddled with TB when they went to the works, they were actually bought from the farm.
Point of order, the Right Honourable David Carter.
I just want to remind Mr Chair and the member that we're talking about the Dairy Industry Restructuring Amendment Bill number 2. 2 simple pages of an amendment, nothing to do with the contribution being made by this member whatsoever.
Mr Chairman, if I might, just to give some context.
No, I don't need any help. I thank the member for that contribution. This has been quite a wide-ranging debate on such a small bill, and I tend to agree with the member, and I'll ask Greg O'Connor to continue, but to come to the bill. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that very clear and concise direction.
Point of order, Derek Ball.
Sorry. I'll just like some clarification, sir, on the ruling you just made. This House is aware, and every member should be aware that this bill didn't go through Select Committee. So I'm just wanting your assurance that there is quite a wide berth given to the speeches that are made through this process, sir.
Yeah, and I can assure the member that if it did go to Select Committee, the content of some of the speeches would not be discussed there. Greg O'Connor.
Thank you again, Mr Chair, for that very clear and concise direction. What I was endeavouring to do was just to build the background and context to understand that this bill, the background of this bill, of course, was around ensuring that there is sufficient competition in the dairy sector in the South Island, in fact right throughout New Zealand, to ensure that actually the people who are ultimately protected are the farmers, because I am aware that there are farmers now in the South Island who are in somewhat trepidation that ultimately their milk will not be picked up, because in the absence of any such competition that this bill is actually addressing, then their fear is there will only be one big provider who will decide they will only stop at a certain river and not go beyond that river to pick up the milk. We'll see those very people that those across the aisle seek to be protecting, was certainly leveraging their anger, as we saw in the previous election, that those very people they seek to be protecting will be the ones who will be left either pouring the milk down the drain or actually having to turn their farms into another source of production. So, Mr Chair, what I recommend this bill to the House for the reason that it's absolutely essential that we have seen that an industry that is so important to New Zealand is essential that we have the right governance structure, that this government, which in the past has saved farmers like my father, saved industries, that they still maintain the ability to do so. And the laissez-faire approach that would be the result of ignoring this legislation will result in a poorer farming environment. Thank you, Mr Chair.
I call Ginny Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.